Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories of everyday people and their families. I endeavour to continue publishing episodes ad-free. In order to do so, I would love your support by reviewing my podcast or consider becoming a subscriber for only the cost of a coffee a month. This gives you early access to episodes and also access to bonus episodes, of which at this stage there's over 30. Episode 191, Snowy Baker. Snowy Baker is one of the greatest all-round athletes in Australian sporting history. He was considered of national calibre in no less than 29 sports and represented Australia internationally in 5 sports: rugby union, diving, boxing, swimming and water polo. He also competed at the 1908 Olympics for Australia in boxing, diving and swimming. He was an expert in both land and water polo, cricket and diving, and had sporting strengths in surfing, fencing, hockey, rowing, yachting and equestrian events. Snowy was born Reginald Leslie Baker on the 8th of February 1884 in Surrey Hills, New South Wales. He was the son of George Baker, an Irish-born Sydney Municipal Council clerk, and his wife Elizabeth Jane Robertson, whose father was Scottish and her mother was English. Snowy was the middle child of 5 boys. He was very blonde, so earned the nickname of Snowy from childhood. He was educated at the Crown Street Public School and reputedly learnt horsemanship at dawn workouts on the Randwick Racecourse. As mentioned, he excelled at most of the sports he competed in, but to name 4 key areas that he excelled in, at the age of 13 he was the New South Wales Open Swimming Champion for the 110 and 220 yards, so now known as the 100 and 200 metres. At the age of 16, he played in the Australian Rugby Union team against Great Britain. At 17, he was middleweight boxing champion of New South Wales, and at 18, he took out the middleweight and heavyweight boxing titles of Australia. His father's maxim was varied activity and enjoyment of good health was the law of life, and he certainly believed in this. In 1897 to 1899, he won a series of swimming championships for his school. He swam and played water polo for the East Sydney Swimming Club, and in 1901 finished second in the state half-mile championship. He was a well-known figure around the swimming baths dotted along Sydney Harbour, displaying his exceptional high diving feats as part of Snowy Baker's Seagulls entertainment troupe. He served as a trooper with the New South Wales Lancers from about 1902, gaining the rank of sergeant and excelling in a variety of military sports. Over the years he won many prizes in activities such as fencing with a sword and bayonet, wrestling on horseback and tent pegging. A fair shot, he was a decidedly handy man in the event of a foe descending on our peaceful shores. In 1902 he took up boxing, and for many years he weighed 11 stone 7 pound, 73 kilos in today's weight. He played rugby union for the eastern suburbs and played halfback for New South Wales in 1900 at the age of 16, and the following year gained his Australian cap against England. His debut game was against Great Britain at Sydney on the 2nd of July 1904. He was among East's players who experimented by reverting to the old method of overhead passes. He played in the first 2 internationals against the British Lions at the age of 20, both won by the visitors, before injury forced his withdrawal from the 3rd match. He was described as a rare tackler and as hard a player for his weight as has been seen in the game. Snowy would later say that rugby union was his strongest sporting love, cultivated by playing for Sydney numerous clubs, including the eastern suburbs. As an oarsman, he rowed for the Mercantile Rowing Club in Championship Maiden and Junior 4s and 8s in 1905 and 1906, and he was also a capable cricketer. He held the light, middleweight and heavyweight amateur boxing championships of New South Wales, the middle and heavyweight titles of Victoria, and the Australian middleweight title. In just one night, at the age of 18 in 1902, he won the Australian middleweight and heavyweight titles. In 1905, he became New South Wales amateur middleweight champion, and the next year retained his title, won the same belt in Victoria, and became the heavyweight champion of both states. Guided by such important early boxing names such as Larry Foley and Peter Jackson, Baker was not just able to defend himself, but basically knock down anyone who stumbled his way, to the extent that for several years he was the main attraction at Australian amateur boxing titles, where he excelled in the middleweight division. It is not generally known that Mr. Baker is an engineer and a draftsman by profession. Having served his apprenticeship with the Colonial Sugar Company, and he later gained further experience at sea as a maritime engineer. Not surprisingly, overseas glory beckoned, and he received an invitation to box in the 1907 England Amateur Championship. In December 1906, farewelled by 1,000 people in Sydney, including a boatload of 20 young ladies who pursued him to the Heads, Baker left for England to compete in the Amateur Boxing Association Championships. But unfortunately, after he arrived, he contracted enteric fever and pneumonia. On the 2nd of September 1907 in the Sydney Australian Star says interesting news of Reg Snowy Baker, the well-known amateur boxer and swimmer, has been received by Mr. Anthony Henry, Honorary Secretary of the Royal Life Saving Society of New South Wales Head Centre, from the head office of that institution in London. The Australians are enjoying the hospitality which Mr. William Henry, the Honorary Secretary of the Society, so kindly accords to all accredited swimmers from this part of the British Empire, and our representatives are apparently having a good time touring the continent of Europe. Reg Baker is going with me to Hanover, Berlin, Helsingfors and the Arctic regions in the north of Finland. We start on the 8th of August and are due in the Arctic Circle on the 20th. On the 25th of August, we are to be at Stockholm and 2 days later Copenhagen, of which we return home to work. What idea have your people with regard to the Olympic Games next year? Our President, Lord Desborough, is anxious that such a swimming colony as New South Wales should be represented. So in March 1908, Reg Snowy Baker, the Sydney amateur boxer, will not compete in the English Boxing Championship this year, but will compete in 1909. Meanwhile, he'll stay in England. And on the 12th of April 1908, it has been decided to include boxing in the Olympic Games, provided 5 countries enter. Australia will be represented by Reg Snowy Baker. If America sends a representative, heaven help the rest. And he made his mark at the 1908 Olympic Games in London. He displayed versatility by competing in 3 different sports. He is the only Australian athlete to compete in 3 separate sports, the Olympic Games, and he did it all at the same Olympics. He represented Australasia in the 4x200 metre freestyle relay, which included Frank Beaurepaire, and they finished well behind England, Hungary and the United States, and finished 4th. They walked away from the pool, unlike Hungary's silver medalists who had to be dragged out after almost drowning at the finish. In the springboard diving competition, he lost in the first round, coming 7th against the powerful Germans who dominated the sport at the time, but he did come a creditable 7th, and Australia finished 4th overall. He boxed in the 1908 Olympic tournament held in London in the October, 3 months after the Games finished. As a middleweight, he won 3 fights in one day, 2 of them by knockouts, to reach the final, which he lost narrowly on points and won a silver medal. The final was against one of England's most admired athletes, John William Henry Tyler Douglas. While a formidable fighter, Douglas was more famous for his exploits on the cricket field, captaining the Essex County team for many years before skippering England. This final earned recognition as one of the greatest boxing duels in Olympic history. Although the bout was given to Douglas, despite Snowy putting in a dispute, not everyone present was convinced that Douglas was the winner, something they made perfectly clear by booing Douglas as he received his gold medal. His father, J.H. Douglas, was president of the Amateur Boxing Association and presented his son with the gold medal and Baker with the silver. The official report did not name referees, but a number of newspaper and magazine reports later claimed that Douglas's father actually refereed the final, and Baker did confirm this in an interview in 1952 with a respected journalist. The pair met in a return match, which was a bare-knuckle fight at a London club, and Baker knocked out Douglas. After the 1908 Olympics, he became an international celebrity. He extensively toured Europe, competing and demonstrating in swimming, diving, boxing, wrestling and horseback riding. He visited Scotland, Ireland, Scandinavia and Europe, and performed at both exhibition and competition level, mainly in aquatic sports, and he was welcomed as a distinguished athlete at gentlemen's sporting clubs wherever he went. He returned to a considerable welcome in Sydney in December 1908. And on the 14th of December 1908, it announces in the paper, Reg Snowy Baker, who was narrowly beaten in the boxing final at the Olympic Games, is to be tendered a welcome home benefit at the Sydney Stadium tonight. A tremendous crowd is expected for Snowy, as he's a popular idol. One interesting item is to be a 4-round bout between Baker and Tommy Burns. And a week later in the Sydney Daily Telegraph, Reg Snowy Baker left here last Friday and many friends were at the station to see him off. He did remarkably well in the Olympic boxing considering his terrible illnesses and received a tremendous ovation when he came up to take his second prize in that great event. Many of us were sorry that he was not first, but he, as well as us, are glad to say that Reg expressed himself thoroughly satisfied with everything. He is looked upon here as one of the finest sportsmen we have had the pleasure of meeting. And in the Sydney Morning Herald, a boxing tournament and musical melange has been arranged to take place this evening at the Manly Skating Rink in aid of the Manly Industrial Home and Local Benevolence Society. The promoters have secured the services of Mr. Reg Snowy Baker. And in the Sydney Evening News on the 27th of February 1909, boxing at Wonderland. The official opening of the Wonderland City Boxing Arena at Bondi took place Friday night. A series of exhibition spars were given and proved that every detail connected with the boxing contests had been thoroughly provided for by Mr. R.L. Snowy Baker. Prior to the commencement of the exhibition, Mr. Baker conducted an evening news reporter over the arena. The ring is erected on the site of the old skating rink and is the finest and most up-to-date yet built here. The posts and floor are heavily padded and the top ropes are bound round with thick soft baize to prevent chafing the competitors when they come into contact with them. The ring is the usual 20-foot one used in amateur contests. 6-ounce gloves will be used and the regulations regarding infighting will also be observed. Mr. Snowy Baker will referee the contest from outside the ring, a platform running around it for this purpose. The lighting of the ring is excellent. Baker capitalised on his athletic and boxing fame and he opened a physical culture establishment with mail order courses in Castlereagh Street. And on the 27th of October 1909 in the Sydney Referee, Reg L. Snowy Baker's physical culture and general athletic rooms in the Belmont buildings in Castlereagh Street will be formally opened tomorrow afternoon. An athletic display of an entertaining nature will be given and military exercises are to be gone through. Snowy's new rooms are elaborately fitted with a punching ball stage, wrestling mat, foils, swords, single strike bayonets, medicine balls, nickel-plated barbells, chest developers, weights, and Spalding's boxing gloves. In the massage department are 3 showers, hot and cold plunge and vapour and electric radiant baths with high-frequency and electric massage apparatuses. Day and evening classes to be held and private lessons given in physical culture, boxing, sword and bayonet work. Special ladies swimming and diving classes will be arranged at Rushcutter Bay Baths and members of the alleged weaker sex may learn how to use the foil and the single stick, exercises which improve carriage or deportment. Crack swimmer, footballer and boxer Harold Baker, brother to Snowy, is assistant instructor. On the 31st of March 1909, at St Mark's Anglican Church at Darling Point, he married Ethel Rose Mackay, the daughter of a squatter and widow of Augustus Daniel Kearney, a Victorian physician and notable tennis player. And the marriage notice reads, Reginald Leslie Baker, 25, single, engineer of Darlinghurst, born Sydney, and Ethel Kearney, 28, widow of Sydney, born in Albury, mother. Ethel had a daughter Joan, who was 7 when they married, and Joan took on the Baker surname. And a little article announcing the marriage was in the Sydney Referee on the 7th of April 1909. Popular Reg L. Snowy Baker entered the bonds of matrimony on Wednesday, much to the surprise of the great majority of his friends, and they all believe that Snowy has made a good choice of his wife, who is a very estimable lady. She is the widow of the late Dr. Kearney, Victoria's champion tennis player, and it is, of course, needless for me to say that Australia's white-haired ex-amateur champion boxer begins his new life with the best wishes of every individual who knows him. Baker was a journalist of skill and he contributed to the Sydney Evening News from 1908 to 1910, and he also published a book called General Physical Culture, which was published in Melbourne in 1910. And the description of the book says, A Guide to Health and Fitness by one of Australia's early Olympians. It includes a very early Australian chapter on surfing by Harold Baker, as well as walking, running, swimming, the crawl stroke by Cecil Healy, diving and boxing. Further chapters include correct breathing, developmental exercises and measurement form, as well as a brief account of Snowy Baker's career. So in 1909, he was an engineer and a draftsman and was employed by CSR. He had a motor vehicle accident in which he was injured, so he retired from competition, and at this stage he became heavily involved in boxing promotion. On the 1st of March 1916, the particulars of the accident were outlined in the Coffs Harbour Advocate. R. Baker's accident. Particulars to hand of Mr. Reg Baker's motor accident on Friday last show that while he ascended the Red Hill, Mr. Baker encountered a mob of horses. One of the animals dashed across the road, coming into collision with the front wheel of the car. This had the effect of wrenching the steering wheel from the driver's hand, with the result that the car went over the bank, through bush and stumps to a depth of 30 feet. This would have been bad enough in all conscience, but unfortunately the driver sustained very serious injuries, with 3 ribs and a collarbone being fractured. Mr. Baker was transferred to the Jetty Private Hospital. The car's windscreen was torn off, lamps smashed, one side of the body of the car badly dented, and the bonnet and mudguards twisted. The car was not insured against an accident, so the owner's loss is a heavy one, and it's anticipated that the repair bill will run into about £20. He became involved in HD McIntosh's Stadium's boxing organisation, mainly as a referee. At times he was controversial. Baker wore green trousers and a felt hat, and later evening dress. In December 1912 he arranged for the purchase of the Rushcutters Bay Stadium for £30,000 and soon, with John Wren, had Snowy Baker stadiums in Melbourne, Adelaide and Brisbane, and was following McIntosh's policy of bringing international boxers to Australia. He and his brothers soon became boxing promoters and set a standard of boxing rules that the rest of the world followed. He worked with a dubious larger-than-life character by the name of Hugh D. McIntosh, known as Huge Deal. Baker became one of the premier boxing promoters in Australia, and he brought the best boxers of the day from North America and Europe. Numbered amongst these was the New York light and welterweight Harry Stone. Baker represented McIntosh's company in Australia, and he worked with his partner W.F. Howe and his wife, who was very involved in the business. He was an opportunist, and he was often a ruthless entrepreneur, and for several years he turned Australia into the fight capital of the world. In 1912 he began Snowy Baker's magazine, a penny monthly that attained a circulation of over 3,000 in its 2 years of existence. He then became General Manager of Stadia Limited in 1914, and he led negotiations to bring George Carpentier to Australia. Baker was also responsible for starting the careers of many of Australia's best boxers, most notably Les Darcy, and was heavily involved in the rise of Darcy, who became known as the country's best-known fighter. In July 1914, the stadium staged its first Les Darcy fight, and Baker soon controlled the Maitland boxers' engagements. However, he and Darcy had a major falling out when Darcy left Australia secretly in October 1916. He publicly denounced Darcy, alluding to his belief that he evaded war service. Darcy died in May 1917 from complications resulting from a botched dental procedure, and many Australians blamed Snowy Baker for his death. It was this fall from grace in the eyes of the Australian public that would ultimately result in Baker's permanent relocation to California. Baker always denied the charges, and he seemed conclusively to have disproved them face-to-face with the Maitland Committee of Inquiry in October 1917. Snowy tried 3 times to enlist in the Australian Imperial Force, but was prevented by a spinal injury. Instead, he devoted himself to fundraising concerts. Boxing declined in popularity, and he put on shows and film nights at the stadium. Baker then moved into the silent film business in 1918. He played a secret agent in The Enemy Within and a station hand in The Lure of the Bush. In The Enemy Within, filmed in 1918, he played a Secret Service agent called in to crack a ring of foreign agents involved in treason and civil violence in Australia. He had a sweetheart, Mai, and she was kidnapped. After a long chase, his character Jack was able to trap the enemy and rescue Mai. So for many years, Baker was Australia's leading actor and a matinee idol, and he was called Australia's first action movie star. In 1919, he was co-producer with E.J. Carroll and starred as a boxing parson in The Man from Kangaroo. It was an adventure film full of stunts, action and romance. Snowy played John Harland, a former boxer turned reverend posted to the town of Kangaroo, and he teaches the local children how to box and falls in love with an heiress. The film offered many chances for Snowy to show off his athletic prowess and his sexual allure, which causes the female lead to fall in love with him within seconds. The Man from Kangaroo was a big hit. Of all the stunts, the most memorable is Snowy chasing a thief through the streets of Sydney. In this clip that has been restored, he scales walls, leaps over fences and jumps off a bridge onto a moving horse and cart before apprehending the criminal. And I'll add the link on so you can see him in action. He starred as a bushranger in The Shadow of Lightning Ridge in 1920. And there was a review of the film. Snowy Baker, the shadow in E.J. Carroll's Australian masterpiece film, The Shadow of Lightning Ridge, takes his audiences round the world in his quest for vengeance against the man who wronged his mother. We see him big game shooting in India, bronco busting in America, tiger hunting in South Africa, and finally bushranging in Australia. There is nothing new about bushranging, but there is something decidedly new about the way the shadow goes to work. An air of mystery is created round his exploits by a mystifying reason for the robberies. When the motive is revealed, the story becomes a whirlwind of excitement. Probably the great success of Lightning Ridge, apart from its delightful Australian atmosphere and Snowy's virile handling of a part made to order for him, is the human interest of the story. He also starred as a jackaroo in The Jackaroo of Coolabong in 1920. Both now are considered lost films, however they did obtain a US release. He then did a promotional tour to America to sell these films, and this is when Snowy met Charlie Chaplin, and Charlie gave him a personal tour on the set of his film at the time, Shoulder Arms. All of Snowy's roles featured his horsemanship and had his famous grey boomerang as part of the show. The collaboration between Baker and two others finished and everyone went their separate ways. In August 1920, Baker left for Hollywood to further his film career. He appeared in The Empire Builders in 1924 and The Sword of Valour also in 1924. Both have been restored by the National Film and Sound Archive of Australia. In The Empire Buildings, it was described as a thrilling story of the African veldt. Snowy shares top billing with his trusty horse, Boomerang, and Boomerang's actually billed as Boomerang the Wonder Horse. In The Empire Builders, his character is Captain William Ballard of the Territorials, and he's sent to make a treaty with the natives, but he meets resistance from the Boers, still unreconciled to British rule. And on the 10th of November 1923, in the Port Pirie Recorder in South Australia, Reg Snowy Baker at Cooee. On Monday night, the Cooperative Films Company will present Reg Snowy Baker's first American production, The Last Race. This production is a thrilling drama because of the alternation of primitive thrills and civilised drama. He plays the character of Richard Carlton, who's disappointed in love and sets out to forget the girl in a whirlwind of adventure. He matches his courage and endurance against a famous wild horse, Mankiller, and it is evident to the most faded fan in the audience that he really risks his life in capturing the infuriated beast. Follows a sequence of such horsemanship as the screen has never seen before, a sequence which leaves one firmly convinced that Reg Snowy Baker could ride a cannonball or a comet if he wished. And on the 31st of January 1926 in the Sydney Sunday Times, Reg L. Snowy Baker. His birthday occurs next Saturday. Snowy Baker is one of the finest all-round athletes Australia has produced. He was in the first flight of football, boxing, swimming and field sports. In the early 1930s, he contributed a column to the Sydney Referee, and during the 1932 Olympics in Los Angeles, he was both Australia's team attaché and a perceptive respondent for the Sydney Referee to give an inside view of the Olympics. In 1933, he became a director and major operating partner of the Riviera Country Club near Santa Monica in California. He took charge of the Riviera Country Club's equestrian centre. He also managed a polo club and coached such actors as Douglas Fairbanks in horse riding. He taught Rudolph Valentino how to fence and kiss, and Shirley Temple and Greta Garbo how to ride, fence and swim. He instructed Elizabeth Taylor on how to ride for National Velvet, acting as her stunt double in several scenes, and he played polo with Walt Disney and Clark Gable. He also trained actor Lash LaRue in the use of a bullwhip. He revisited Australia briefly in 1925, 1932 and 1952, and Snowy Baker died of cerebrovascular disease on the 2nd of December 1953 at Los Angeles. His estate in New South Wales was valued for probate at £39,111, which he left to his wife. He and his wife had no children. On the 12th of December 1953, the Cairns Post in Queensland announces his death. Australia's most famous sportsman, Reg Snowy Baker, died in the US recently. He was 69, a champion swimmer, diver, boxer, wrestler, fencing expert, actor and rough rider, and he was also one of the finest left-hand bowlers Australian cricket has seen. Snowy was inducted into the Sport Australia Hall of Fame in 1985 as an athlete member for his contributions to multiple sports. And he was described as a star in every sense of the word, excelling in every activity he pursued. He never forgot about Australia, with the hope of someday returning here permanently, but died the following year. His stature as an athlete depends largely upon the enormous range rather than the outstanding excellence of his activities. It was as an entrepreneur showman, a publicist and a businessman that he seems in retrospect to have been most important. Snowy Baker was quick-witted and a wisecracking prankster who loved a bet and will always remain one of his country's most legendary sporting figures. And just a little on his siblings. One brother, William Harold Baker, was born on the 29th of September 1887 in Sydney. He was an Australian boxing and wrestling champion, a fine oarsman and a weightlifter, and he was also a member of the famous Flying Squadron swim relay team that set world records. He was the Australian water polo captain, an Australia-Asian sprint swim champion, and in 1970 won the 100 and 220-yard championships, and in the 100 yards broke the winning sequence of Olympian Cecil Healy in that event. He won 3 New South Wales championships in 1906 and captained the Australian water polo team. He was a member of the Sydney District Football Club until it was disbanded in 1910, and then he joined Randwick for the Eastern Suburbs in 1914, and who that season represented New South Wales once and Australia 3 times, all against New Zealand. He was a tough, athletic, mobile flanker. He was captain of the Maroubra Surf Club from 1900 to 1910, and on the 28th of January 1910 he took part in a famous surf rescue of over 100 people at Cronulla Beach. About midday, dangerous conditions at Coogee swept a crowd of young swimmers out to sea. All were in danger of drowning. 2 volunteer lifesavers that were at the beach at the time, one of them being Harold, bravely entered the surf to save as many as they could. Luckily, Harold was the proprietor of the dressing sheds and the refreshment stall on the beach, and it was his normal practice to be on hand. However, the other volunteer lifesaver, Jim Clarkin, happened to be shopping in Coogee and simply called down to the beach to meet up with Baker. While they were leaning on a railing, talking and watching the surf, they noticed a group of young people prepared to enter the surf near the rip. They both jumped onto the sand and ran towards the surfers shouting, with the aim of warning them to move along the beach, but it was too late. The swimmers had already entered the water by the time Baker and Clarkin were in earshot. The rip had quickly swept them up, and they could be seen frantically waving for help beyond the breakers. Baker plunged into the surf, fully clothed, and quickly reached the group. Panicking, a young woman grabbed at Baker and threatened to pull them under the water and drown them both. Baker resorted to slugging her into submission and managed to drag her into shallow water where other swimmers pulled her ashore. Baker then pulled off his clothes and swam back to see who else he could save. 3 young women immediately grabbed him, again threatening to drown the whole group, and Baker set out for the 3rd time, about 200 metres, where he was able to grab another girl, place her on his shoulders and swam to shore with her. In all, they made 3 journeys back and forth in the surf to save potential victims, and between them they managed to rescue 9 or 10 people. At some stage, Baker was trying to revive one of the drowned victims and was told there was still someone struggling in the water. He set out again to save this person, but it was in vain. The person was already deceased. This incident seemed to weigh very heavily with Baker. Had he not wasted time on trying to save someone already deceased, he may have saved another life. Tragically, at the end of the day, they could not reach everyone, and 5 young surfers lost their lives. Every one of the young women was saved by Baker and Clarkin, but 4 victims were a boy and 3 young men. Joseph McGrath, 25, a tramway labourer from North Sydney; George Mackle, 28, a tramway conductor from Petersham; David Andrew Wilson, 9 years old, of Coogee; and a 12-year-old Sydney Hardy from Randwick. Hardy's body was not recovered. And the surf evidently claimed a 5th victim. Clothes found near the men's bars were identified as those of JJT Holt, a cadet on the naval training ship Medway, who went missing from his vessel from that fateful Saturday afternoon of the tragedy. Remarkably, in the inquest, there was criticism of Harold Baker for discarding his heavy wet clothing and being naked during the rescue. To make matters worse, while he was saving lives, Baker's kiosk had been burgled by some heartless individual. There was also criticism for the paucity of volunteer lifesavers on the beach at the time. Many had travelled some distance to a surfing competition at North Style Beach. But the surf lifesaving movement was still in its infancy. Saturday mornings were still considered a time of business rather than recreation. Even the practices recognised today as warning signals had not been standardised. Baker had apparently erected the red warning flag on his own initiative. William was awarded the Albert Medal for bravery, and a public subscription for him raised £1,000 in its first week. He married Nellie Innes Sarah Crawshaw on the 12th of June 1912 and had their only child, Ainsley Innes Baker, in January 1913, and Ainsley did not marry. William went on to win further boxing and wrestling championships, and he worked with Snowy for Stadiums Limited and refereed many of Les Darcy's important fights, including the one against Fritz Holland on the 12th of September 1914, when he disqualified Darcy for a foul. He was described as a man with a marble mouth and a jaw of steel, a man of ice with frozen eyes and a frozen voice. He became the top referee at the Sydney Stadium. He enlisted in World War I and is listed as Harold William Baker, Lieutenant, 26, a physical culturalist from Coogee, New South Wales, and his wife is listed as his next of kin. And he was in the 12th Light Horse Brigade, and he was deployed to Gallipoli, but did not make it to the front line as he was seriously injured his spine on the way to Europe. Eddie Can wrote of him in the East's Rugby Story. A man of indomitable spirit and courage was Baker, whose career seemingly ended when he fell down the hold of a troop ship and broke his spine. He was in plaster from neck to toe for no less than 2 years. Try to imagine his ordeal. He had to be immovable for 4 years, and further years elapsed before he could walk anything like in a normal manner. During that period, Baker wrote, "For the last 5 months I could feel nothing except in the last few days. I noticed a slight sensation in my toes. I am anxious to don my uniform again." He was discharged in October 1916 due to this injury, and returned to Australia on the 28th of January 1916. His splendid physique and his grit not only pulled him through, but in the late 1920s he was able to go back to swimming, surfing, rowing, playing football, and in fact proving so efficient at these and other sports as men many years his junior. He coached the Randwick First from 1923 to 1930 and steered the team to its first premiership in first grade in 1930, and he was for some years president of the Coogee Surf Lifesaving Club. He managed the New South Wales rugby team when it toured New Zealand in 1925, and members of that team have since been accorded Australian representative status. He was honoured in 1931 as one of Randwick's first 3 life members. In Gordon Bray's book The Spirit of Rugby, in its prelude, he quotes Harold Baker's article in the New South Wales Rugby Union News on the 19th of May 1929. Baker was in each of the 3 games against the All Blacks, and one can only conjecture how many tests he might have played if World War I had not broken out. His brother Snowy is generally considered as Australia's finest ever sportsman, but Harold's not far behind, and when it came to the game of rugby, Harold made a more significant contribution. He died on the 17th of October 1962 at Wallara, aged 75. Another brother was Frank Clarence Baker, who was born on the 11th of October 1892 in Sydney. He was a skipper who loved sailing. He won a junior dinghy race on the Sydney Harbour in 1897 at the age of only 8, and he was also a water polo player. In the 1910s, he met director Frank Ford through a colleague in England, and the two formed a close connection. Baker worked in every Frank Ford film, 17 of them in all, and later also in John Ford's films as a stuntsman. When he became too old to work as a stuntsman, he continued as an extra in these films. He began his career in silent films and continued his activity until after the introduction of sound, and he made his debut in A Harmony in a Flat in 1916. He enlisted in World War I on the 10th of June 1916. Frank Clarence Baker, corporal, a physical culture instructor, aged 22, and his father of Bellevue in Coogee was his next of kin. He moved from Australia to Hollywood in 1923. He was an actor known for Scotty of the Scouts in 1926, The Call of the Heart in 1928, and Tentacles of the North also in 1926. He married Helen Elizabeth Brenner, née Ingram, in 1929. He featured in The New Adventures of Tarzan in 1935, and he appeared in 4 Best Picture Academy Award-winning films: How Green Was My Valley, 1941, Mrs. Miniver, 1942, Around the World in 80 Days in 1956, and My Fair Lady in 1964. He made his final film appearance in Herbie Rides Again in 1974, after which he retired. In July 1977, he was able to skipper the winning yacht in a 60-mile offshore race down the California coast at the age of 87, while living in the Mary Pickford cottage of the Motion Picture Country House. His wife died in 1972, and he died on the 30th of December 1980 at Woodland Hills, LA, aged 78, and they had no children. Another brother was Ernest Alfred Baker, who was born in 1878 in Sydney. He was also a water polo player, and he married Edith Wiseman in Newtown, New South Wales in June 1909. Ernest's occupation at the time of their marriage was a packer. They had 2 sons, and Ernest died on the 21st of January 1916 in Hornsby, New South Wales, aged only 38. And in the Parramatta paper, the Cumberland Argus and Fruit Growers Advocate, on the 29th of January 1916, it announces his death. Mr. Ernest Alfred Baker, brother of Mr. R. Snowy Baker, died at his residence, Woomera, Central Avenue, Thornley, at the age of 38. He'd been suffering from a pulmonary complaint for some time. Before he was ill, he was the manager of the Sydney Stadium, and he often took charge of this during his brother's absence and lent an able hand in running the Baker Gymnasium in Sydney. All who came in contact with him liked Mr. Ernest Baker. And his 4th sibling, George Frederick Baker, was born in 1881 in Sydney, New South Wales. He was an amateur welterweight champion of Australia, and he married Lillian Robb in Petersham, New South Wales in 1909, and they had 3 girls. He was a council employee, and he died on the 27th of April 1941 in Canterbury, New South Wales at the age of 60. So I hope you enjoyed the story of Snowy Baker. He was certainly a man of many talents. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch.